The weight of the crystal water glass felt like an anchor in my hand. It was the only solid thing in a room that seemed to be tilting on its axis, a grand ballroom filled with the murmur of polite society and the clinking of expensive silverware. I focused on the refracted light dancing through the facets, 1,000 tiny rainbows spinning in my palm. Anything to avoid looking at him. Mark, my ex-husband, seated directly across the small, circular table, was holding court. He always did. It was his natural state, to be the sun around which lesser planets were expected to orbit. Tonight, I was just a forgotten moon, caught in his gravitational pull against my will. The red silk of my dress felt like a warning siren, too loud, too bold for the woman I felt like inside. I had chosen it to feel powerful, but under his gaze, it just felt like a target. "It's for a wonderful cause, of course," a woman named Brenda was saying, her diamonds glittering with every turn of her head. "The Children's Literacy Fund." So important, she smiled a tight, inquisitive smile at me. "Chloe, it's been ages. You look, well," the pause was just long enough to be an insult. It was the kind of pause that invited speculation, that suggested the alternative was more likely. I offered a small, practiced smile. "It's good to see you too, Brenda. You're looking lovely." My voice was steady, a small victory in a battle only I was aware of. Mark's eyes flickered towards me, a familiar glint of amusement in them. He loved this. He loved seeing me navigate the social minefields he'd once guided me through, and which he now clearly believed I was lost in. "So, what have you been up to?" Brenda's husband, Tom, asked, his tone genuinely curious and therefore far more dangerous. He was a kind man, which meant he wouldn't see the trap he was laying. I opened my mouth to give the vague, polished answer I'd rehearsed, but Mark cut in before I could utter a syllable. "Chloe is exploring her creative side," he announced to the table, his voice dripping with a condescending warmth that made my skin crawl. "Lots of little art projects. Finding herself, you know," he gestured vaguely with his hand, as if describing a child's finger-painting hobby. The table nodded, their expressions a mixture of pity and polite disinterest. My little art projects were commissions that were finally starting to pay my bills, paintings I poured my soul into. To him, they were nothing, a footnote in the story of his success. My story, in his eyes, had ended the day our divorce was finalized. This public performance was simply him writing the epilogue, one where I faded into quaint, irrelevant obscurity. I took a slow sip of water, the cold liquid doing nothing to extinguish the fire in my throat. The night was young, and I was already suffocating. My life with Mark had been a masterclass in diminishment. It wasn't a sudden erosion of self, but a slow, methodical sanding down of every edge, every ambition, until I was smooth, polished, and perfectly shaped to fit into the small box he'd designated for me. He never said, "Don't paint," he'd said, "It's a wonderful hobby, honey. It keeps you busy." He never said my opinions were worthless. He'd just laugh and say, "Oh, Chloe, you're so wonderfully naive," before explaining to our dinner guests how the world really worked. He was a master of the patronizing compliment, the gentle dismissal that felt like kindness, but landed like a slap. When I finally found the courage to leave, it wasn't because of a single dramatic event, but from the realization that I was slowly disappearing. The person I saw in the mirror was a ghost, a pale reflection of the vibrant woman I used to be. The divorce had been his narrative from the start. He was the magnanimous one, letting me go to find my path, while he, the ever-patient husband, was left to pick up the pieces of his tragically disrupted life. "Art projects? That sounds lovely," Brenda said, her voice laced with the kind of saccharine sympathy reserved for lost pets and failed ventures. "Anything we might have seen?" The question was a barb disguised as a butter knife. She knew, as did everyone in Mark's circle, that my work wasn't hanging in the galleries they frequented. "I mostly do private commissions," I said, keeping my tone light. "It's been fulfilling." Mark chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that made the couple next to him smile in anticipation. "She's always been modest," he said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "The truth is, she's still getting on her feet. It's a tough world out there without a safety net," His eyes met mine across the table, a silent, cruel reminder of the financial security he represented, the world he still effortlessly inhabited and from which I was now exiled. He was painting a picture for them, and in it, I was a tragic figure, the lost, artistic ex-wife, struggling to make sense of the world after leaving the orbit of a successful man. And the worst part was a small, terrified part of me believed it. That was his greatest trick, making his fiction feel like my reality. I had spent the last year fighting that voice in my head, the one that sounded exactly like him. Tonight, it was whispering that he was right, that I was a fraud in a red dress, playing dress-up at a party where I no longer belonged. The conversation drifted, but the undercurrent of my humiliation remained. I felt the weight of their collective judgment, their polite pity. They were Mark's friends, after all. They had witnessed his version of our breakup, heard his carefully curated stories of my instability and my unrealistic dreams. To them, I was a cautionary tale. Mark, meanwhile, was thriving. He spoke of a recent promotion at his investment firm, a new condo overlooking the city, a trip to Monaco he'd just returned from. He was constructing his post-divorce life as a monument to his own success, and my presence here tonight was clearly meant to be a final, decorative plaque on its facade, detailing the sad story of what he'd left behind. It was a calculated act of cruelty, inviting me to this gala, an event we used to attend together, and seating me at a table with people who only knew his side of the story. He wanted an audience for my failure. "And you're remarried, I heard?" Brenda asked, her eyes sharp and bird-like. The question dropped into the conversation like a stone, sending ripples of silence across the table. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Yes, I am." Mark leaned back, a smug smile playing on his lips. "Yes, she is." Snatched up again, just like that. "We haven't had the pleasure of meeting him, though. Chloe keeps him very private." The word private was loaded, suggesting something to be ashamed of, something that couldn't withstand the scrutiny of their world. "No one here has met him, have they? What does he do, Chloe?" The question hung in the air. I thought of Min, his quiet strength, the steady calm in his eyes, the way he listened when I spoke about my art, not as a hobby but as the very center of my being. How could I possibly explain him to these people? How could I distill the man who had meticulously rebuilt my confidence, piece by piece, into a neat, socially acceptable label for Mark to dissect and dismiss? "He's in international business," I said, the words feeling hopelessly inadequate. It was the simple, vague truth we had agreed upon for situations like this.
Mark seized on it.
International business. How mysterious. Is he here tonight? Or is he off doing business internationally? He laughed, and a few others joined in, a nervous tittering. The implication was clear. My new husband was either non-existent or not presentable. He was a fiction I'd created, or a man so far beneath their station that I was wise to keep him hidden. I felt a flush of heat creep up my neck. I was not ashamed of Min. I was terrified of what their judgment would do to the sacred, quiet world we had built together, a world so far removed from this glittering cage of a ballroom. I was protecting him, but it looked like I was hiding him. And Mark knew it. He was twisting my love into a weapon against me. The humiliation crested a few minutes later, during a lull in the formal program. Mark stood up, raising his champagne flute. A few heads at our table turned, assuming he was going to make a toast to the charity. But his eyes were fixed on me. "I'd like to propose a toast," he began, his voice carrying just enough to draw the attention of the adjacent tables. To new beginnings, he smiled graciously, the perfect picture of a benevolent ex-husband. And to moving on. To bigger, better things, he paused, letting the words sink in, his gaze sweeping over his expensive watch and the well-dressed guests around him. The meaning was unmistakable. He was the bigger, better thing. "And to Chloe," he said, turning his full attention to me. The table was now frozen in a state of excruciating awkwardness. "I wish her all the happiness in the world as she finds her way." It was a masterpiece of public degradation, delivered with a smile. It was a pat on the head and a knife in the ribs, all at once. He was dismissing my entire life, my new marriage, my career, my very identity. As a temporary, confused state of finding my way, he was cementing his narrative, casting himself as the magnanimous victor and me as the pitiable runner-up. The sympathetic glances from Brenda and the others felt like tiny stones being thrown at me. I could feel the blood draining from my face, but I held his gaze. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. I lifted my water glass, my hand trembling almost imperceptibly, and touched it to my lips in a silent, defiant acknowledgement. The silence that followed his toast was deafening. He sat down, looking pleased with himself, the conquering hero of his own small, pathetic drama. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to run out of the ballroom and never look back. But I also knew that was exactly what he wanted. So I sat there, encased in my red dress and my silent fury, and I waited for the world to stop tilting. For a long moment, I just breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth. A trick Min had taught me for when the noise of the world became too much. Find your center, Chaeyoung, he would say, using my Korean name, the one only he used. It was a name that felt more real to me than the one on my birth certificate. It was the name of the woman he saw, the artist, the strong and resilient soul he believed me to be. It was not the name of the fragile creature Mark was describing to his friends. I clung to that thought like a lifeline.
I was not who he said I was.
His opinion was a ghost, an echo from a life I no longer lived. It had no power here unless I gave it power. I straightened my spine, placed my hands in my lap, and focused on the orchestra playing softly on the stage. The music was a gentle melody, a current of sanity in the madness of the evening. I would not let him win. I would not let him see the sting of his words. I felt a strange sense of detachment settle over me, a quiet calm in the eye of the storm. I could see them all so clearly now. Mark, with his desperate need for validation. Brenda, with her hunger for gossip to fill the emptiness of her own life. Tom, kind but ineffectual, a passenger in his own marriage. They weren't giants. They were just people, flawed and insecure, playing their parts in a tired social drama. And I was no longer a part of their cast. My decision to stay wasn't about defiance anymore. It was about claiming my own space. I had as much right to be in this room as any of them. I had bought my own ticket, with money I had earned from my own work. My little art projects had paid for this seat at this table where my ex-husband was trying to tell me I didn't belong. The irony was so bitter it was almost sweet. I allowed a small, genuine smile to touch my lips for the first time that night. It was a smile just for me. And then, the atmosphere in the room began to change. It started as a subtle shift, a quiet dip in the ambient chatter near the grand entrance. It was a hush that spread like a ripple in a pond, one table falling silent, then the next. Heads began to turn, not with casual curiosity, but with a sudden, focused attention. The orchestra seemed to fade into the background. A man had entered the ballroom, and without a single word, he had captured the attention of everyone present. He wasn't dressed any more lavishly than the other men in their tuxedos, but he wore his suit with an air of absolute authority, as if it were armor forged specifically for him. He moved with an unhurried grace that was mesmerizing, his presence creating a vortex of silence around him. The host of the event, a portly man who had been glad-handing politicians all evening, practically scurried over to greet him, his expression a mixture of reverence and anxiety. Mark and the others at our table had noticed the change. "Who is that?" Brenda whispered, craning her neck. Mark squinted. "I don't recognize him. Probably some tech billionaire from out of town." There was a note of irritation in his voice. A new sun had appeared in his solar system, and he didn't like it. I didn't need to squint. I knew the set of his shoulders, the deliberate, calm cadence of his walk. I knew the way his dark hair fell just so over his brow. My heart, which had been a cold, tight knot in my chest, suddenly unfurled, beating a warm, steady rhythm. The anchor I had been holding, the heavy water glass, no longer felt necessary. My own anchor had just walked into the room. It was Min. He paused for a moment, listening to the fawning host, his expression polite but impassive. He scanned the room, his dark, intelligent eyes sweeping over the crowd. They passed over mayors and CEOs and local celebrities without a flicker of recognition. And then they found me. Across the vast, crowded ballroom, his eyes locked with mine. In that instant, the entire room, with all its noise and judgment and history, melted away. There was only him. A slow, warm smile spread across his face, a smile reserved only for me, and it reached his eyes, crinkling the corners in that way that always made my breath catch. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to the host, effectively dismissing him, and began to walk. He didn't weave through the tables. He walked in a straight, unwavering line directly towards me. The crowd seemed to part for him instinctively, guests leaning back in their chairs, waiters freezing mid-step. The ripple of silence followed him, a wave of palpable power washing over the room. At our table, everyone had fallen completely silent, their attention now fixed on the approaching stranger. Brenda's jaw was slightly agape. Tom looked bewildered. And Mark was staring, a deep frown creasing his forehead, a flicker of confusion and dawning apprehension in his eyes. He was watching the most powerful man in the room walk past everyone else, his gaze fixed on one person, the woman he had just publicly dismissed as a quaint, struggling artist who was still finding her way. The world wasn't tilting anymore. It had snapped back into perfect, stunning alignment. He reached our table, and the silence there was absolute. He didn't look at Mark or Brenda or anyone else. His eyes were only for me. He stopped beside my chair and gently placed a hand on my shoulder. His touch was warm and firm, a silent communication of strength and support that flowed directly into me. "I hope I am not too late, my love," he said, his voice low and smooth, a rich baritone that cut through the tension like a hot knife through butter. It was for my ears only, but in the profound quiet, everyone heard it. I looked up at him, the smile I'd been holding inside finally blooming on my face. "You're right on time," I murmured. Mark finally found his voice, though it was strained, uncertain. "Chloe," he said, forcing a laugh that sounded like grinding gears. "You didn't tell us you were bringing a guest." He was trying to reclaim control, to frame Min as an accessory, and add on to my presence. Min finally turned his head, his gaze falling upon Mark for the first time. He didn't glare. He didn't threaten. He simply looked. And in that quiet, assessing glance, he stripped Mark of every ounce of his self-importance. It was the look of a lion observing a mouse. "She did not bring a guest," Min said, his voice calm and level, yet carrying an unmistakable edge of steel. "I came to join my wife." The word wife landed on the table with the force of a physical blow. Brenda's eyes widened to comical proportions. Tom choked on a sip of wine. Mark's face went from confused to pale, then to a blotchy, horrified red. He stared at me, then at Min, the pieces clicking into place in his mind with an audible crash. This was him, the mysterious, private husband, the man he had mocked. This man, who commanded the attention of the entire room, was my husband. Before Mark could process the new reality, the event host, Mr. Davenport, bustled over to our table, his face flushed with nervous energy. "Mr. Kong, I am so sorry. We had no idea you were gracing us with your presence tonight. We would have arranged a better table, of course, right at the front." Min's hand never left my shoulder. "There is no better table, Mr. Davenport," he said, his eyes flicking back to me. "I am exactly where I need to be." Davenport wrung his hands. Of course, of course. Is there anything we can get for you? Champagne? Anything at all?" He then seemed to notice Mark for the first time, not as a guest, but as an obstacle.
"Oh, Mark.
"I see you've met Mr. and Mrs. Kong." The casual use of Mark's first name, compared to the formal title he used for Min, was a brutal, unintentional confirmation of the new social order. Mark, who had built his identity on being an important man in rooms like this, had just been rendered utterly insignificant. He looked like he'd been struck by lightning. The power he had so carefully wielded all night had not just vanished. It had been transferred, completely and irrevocably, to me. Min looked down at me, his expression softening as he took in the remnants of the storm in my eyes. He saw it all. He always did. "Are you ready to leave?" he asked softly, his thumb tracing a gentle circle on my shoulder. It wasn't a command, but a genuine question. He was giving me the choice. I could stay and bask in this newfound power, watch Mark squirm under the weight of his own miscalculation. But I didn't need to. The victory was already complete. The validation wasn't in their shocked faces. It was in the steady presence of the man standing beside me. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and strong. "I am." He nodded once. He pulled my chair back for me, and I stood, the red dress no longer feeling like a target, but like a banner of triumph. He placed a light hand on the small of my back, a gesture of both possession and protection. He gave a curt, dismissive nod to the table at large. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," he said, the words a clear finality. He didn't spare Mark another glance. As we turned to leave, I saw it. The entire ballroom was watching us. The whispers followed us, not of pity for me, but of awe and frantic speculation.
Who was he?
And more importantly, who was she? I was no longer Mark's sad little ex-wife. I was the woman on the arm of Mr. Kong, a mystery, a figure of sudden and immense interest. We walked through the parted sea of guests, Min's presence a shield around me. I didn't look back. There was no need. I could feel Mark's humiliation burning a hole in the back of my head. He had wanted an audience for my downfall, and instead, they had all borne witness to his. He had tried to write my story for me, and my husband had walked in and torn out the page. As we reached the grand doors, Min leaned in close, his lips brushing against my ear. "You look breathtaking in that dress, Chae-young," he whispered. A queen in red, and in that moment, under the golden light of the chandeliers, with the eyes of the entire city's elite on us, that's exactly what I felt like. Not because of him, but because he saw the queen that was in me all along. The doors swung open, and we walked out into the cool night air, leaving the tilting room and all its ghosts behind. The silence in the back of the town car was a comfortable, welcome blanket. The city lights slid across the tinted windows, painting fleeting streaks of gold and white across Min's face. He had taken my hand the moment we sat down, his thumb stroking gently over my knuckles. He didn't speak, giving me the space to let the adrenaline of the evening subside. I rested my head against his shoulder, the crisp fabric of his tuxedo jacket cool against my cheek, and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for a year. "Are you all right?" he finally asked, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through his chest. "I am now," I said, turning my head to look at him. "Thank you for coming." He shifted, turning to face me more fully, his expression serious. "I should not have let you go alone. I knew he would be there. I underestimated his capacity for cruelty. For that, I am sorry." I shook my head, tightening my grip on his hand. "Don't be. You didn't do anything wrong. And I needed to. I don't know. I think I needed to face him on my own. I just didn't realize he'd bring an entire firing squad." A small, wry smile touched my lips. "Did you see Brenda's face?" A corresponding smile, faint but genuine, appeared on his. "I did. I believe she was attempting to calculate my net worth through simple observation. I do not think she was successful." His dry wit was one of the things I loved most about him. He could command a boardroom or terrify a rival with a single look, but with me, he was this. Calm, funny, and impossibly gentle. "He called my paintings little art projects," I said, the words coming out quieter than I intended. The sting was still there, a faint echo of the wound. Min's smile vanished. His gaze intensified, his dark eyes holding mine. He reached up with his free hand, his fingers gently tucking a stray curl behind my ear. His touch was featherlight. "The man is a fool," he said, his voice low and firm, imbued with an unshakable certainty. "He stands in a room full of forgeries and fails to recognize the one true masterpiece in front of him. His opinion is worth less than the dust on your canvases. You are not an artist because you sell paintings, Chayoung. You are an artist because you cannot be anything else. It is in the way you see the world. It is in your soul. He was never capable of seeing your soul. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and sudden. They weren't tears of sadness, but of overwhelming relief and love. He didn't just offend me. He understood me. He saw the very part of me that Mark had tried so hard to extinguish, and he called it beautiful. He called it a masterpiece. He saw my truth. How did you know to come? I asked, my voice thick with emotion. I called your phone to see how it was going, and it went to voicemail, he explained simply. Then I felt a disturbance in the force, he smirked slightly. No, I just had a bad feeling. A sense that you might need me. So I came. A sense that you might need me. It was that simple. In my old life, a bad feeling would have been dismissed as me being overly emotional. For Min, it was a call to action. We rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, the city unfolding around us. When we arrived at our home, a modern house with wide glass walls overlooking a quiet, wooded ravine, he helped me out of the car. Inside, he took my wrap, his hands lingering on my arms. Go upstairs, he said softly. I will bring you something. I did as he asked, shedding the red dress in our bedroom. It lay on a chair, a pool of defiant silk. I slipped into one of his soft cotton shirts, the fabric smelling of him, of safety and home. When I came back out, he was waiting in the living room. He had turned the lights down low, and on the coffee table was a tray with 2 cups of steaming chamomile tea and a small plate of the cookies he knew I loved. He had shed his tuxedo jacket and tie, his sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He patted the space next to him on the sofa. I curled up beside him, tucking my feet beneath me, and he wrapped a strong arm around me, pulling me against his side. I picked up a cup of tea, its warmth seeping into my cold hands. We sat there for a long time, watching the moon rise over the trees, the only sound the quiet sipping of our tea. The grand ballroom, Mark, the pitying eyes, it all felt a million miles away. It was another world, one that could no longer touch me here, in this sanctuary he had built with me and for me. He has no power over you anymore, Min said, as if reading my thoughts. Tonight was not about him showing you how small you are. It was about him showing the world how small he is. I leaned my head against his shoulder, closing my eyes. I love you, Min. I felt his lips press against the top of my head. I love you, my Chayoung, my masterpiece. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that he was right. My story wasn't an epilogue to Mark's. It was a novel, vast and beautiful and entirely my own. And the best chapters were just beginning.